ton of detail with this. Let's just talk about some of the big picture concepts, which for us start with the creation of human civilization. We know that we need some context for our essay in May, so it is possible we could use something from period 0 to give a little context depending on what time period our DBQ is about. So we know that humans had started farming approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago. Excuse me, not farming. No, it is right. They did start farming. I've lost my mind. I apologize. We do have the discovery of agriculture, of domestication of animals. And obviously the concern for that is we have to be good enough at it to have enough food that we can feed people to do activities that aren't food-based. So to become civilized, we have to be able to feed our scribes, our priests, our government officials, our soldiers. We have to be able to feed those people. So we have to be good enough at farming to have excess food to feed those people. So we start somewhere around 10 to 12,000 years ago in the Middle East. We do not have the first civilizations till about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, also the first ones being in the Middle East. So it takes us about 6,000 years, give or take, to get good enough at farming that we have enough extra food produced to provide enough food for people who are not doing food-based jobs. And that's really all we're going to get into with that. So what makes a group of people civilized? I know this was a long time ago, but I'd like some of you guys to chime in. You don't have to, if you don't have to pull out your notes and get the list. Yes, there was a list, but what are some things that make a group of people civilized? Things that did not happen before 5,000 to 6,000 years ago that start to happen approximately at that time. Any ideas? Just unmute yourself, chime in.
Didn't we say that they stopped being nomadic, like they would stay in one place, and that was like the first step to like a civilized?
Well, that is definitely part of it, Grace, but we start doing that right away. Like that's something that we do because obviously to farm you can't move around because your crops need to be tended, your animals need to be fed and tamed and all those things. So to have that, you're going to have to settle down. That is part of it, absolutely. But I don't know. It takes us. We're doing that for thousands of years before we become civilized. But thank you. Anybody else have an idea? Hey, Isaac, you finally made it. Ashley, go ahead.
I was just gonna say like some form of government, so like something to keep them like civilized and have some means of like control.
Okay, so definitely a government based on, it's not based on kinship. It's too big that we don't just have like a tribe where my grandpa is the tribal chief. It's going to be people that aren't related to each other. It's going to be bigger and more expansive. That's definitely part of it. Okay, well, that also implies actually that we have a law code, that we have a system of rules that we have. How do people know what those rules are?
Didn't they write them down and then like post them where other people like in the town square? Correct.
So we have a system of writing for record keeping. That's really important. Now, of course, most people can't read and write, but that's not really the point. It's the fact that we do have a way to have our laws, to have our religious traditions, to have our business transactions, etc., and keep those. So definitely a system of record keeping from writing is important. That's good. I'll take one or two more and then we'll move on. Anybody else have one? Another trait of civilization?
Didn't they have to have like specialized jobs too, or like new jobs that weren't part of agriculture?
Absolutely. And I would argue, Megan, that's the most important one, because all the other things, monumental architecture, huge buildings, long distance trade, people that engage in that behavior, a sophisticated interest in science and art, all those things require that you have people doing things that aren't food related. You're not going to be a very good scientist if half your time you're in the field, half your time you're trying to figure out how to build things. So therefore you have to be able to commit to that process. And that's part of the creation of civilization. Okay, good. Now we're not going to get into the details of a lot of these ancient civilizations. There's really no point. If we were taking multiple choice or maybe LEQ, we might get a little more into it, but we're not. So we're just going to broadly say that we know human civilization evolves over time. We start in the Middle East. We move out to places like Egypt. The ancient Chinese, of course, have the Shang dynasty. We have the Indus River Valley civilization in today what is Pakistan, but historically we call it India. And so these 4 river valley civilizations basically create a lot of the things that we know of in human civilization today. Basically like a time system that's based on 60, a 365-day calendar, basic inventions like the wheel, et cetera, et cetera. And these civilizations are relatively successful. And we know they traded with each other because we have evidence of Chinese artifacts in India, Mesopotamian artifacts in China, et cetera, et cetera. So we know they had some interaction with each other. So they obviously had to know how to get to some places. So they had some science and understanding of how to do that. And so all these processes are taking place. Now, what I'd really like to focus on in period 0 are the major religious and philosophical traditions, because that's what's most likely to be something that would carry into a DBQ that you would write. So let's start with oldest and work our way to newest until we get to 1200. Okay, so that's quite a few. We've got several to go through, and that'll probably take a good chunk of time. All right, so we start with Judaism. We start with Judaism because, actually, no, I'll change that. I'm going to start with Hinduism. I'm out of order today. Hinduism is the world's oldest major religion. How old is it? We don't know. We don't know. It's thousands of years-ish, kind of, sort of, somewhere in there. There's a lot of different theories about it, about who might have started it, about when it started. Basically, we don't know. What we do know is most people would characterize Hinduism as polytheistic. There are many gods. Now, some people would disagree with that assessment. Pardon me just a second. Someone's knocking on my door. So, as I was saying, with Hinduism, we know there are many gods. They serve different purposes. Hinduism is pretty flexible. You don't necessarily all have to worship the same gods. There's hundreds of them. You might worship 2. Your neighbor might worship 5. Your favorite god or goddess may be one that your uncle hates. And so it's really flexible. But basically, the moral fiber of Hinduism is as such. Every living creature has a soul. So that's plants, that's animals, that's fungi, that's you and I. We all have souls. The soul lives forever. The soul will never die. So when a body dies, of course, what happens to the soul? Anyone remember?
It's
Anyone?
reincarnated.
Reincarnated. So the soul is reborn into another body. Correct. Reincarnated is the word we're looking for. Excellent. And so what that means is that your moral code is basically setting you up for your next life. All right. We believe in what's called Dharma. D-H-A-R-M-A. If you don't know how to spell it, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Dharma is your moral duty, your sense of right and wrong, which is a basic tenet of all religions. Remember, religion tends to provide 2 things for humans. It provides a sense of morality. Now, of course, we can be moral and have our own moral code without religion, but every religion sets forth the belief system of how to behave, what's right and what is wrong. What religion also does is, I like to call it, it answers the so-called big questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose? What happens when we die? What is the nature of existence? All these kind of questions. Religions try to answer those questions as well. So, in Hinduism, we have the belief that our dharma, our sense of moral duty for a human being at least, is set up by which system in place that is coordinated with Hinduism. All right, anybody, feel free to chime in. Megan, I appreciate it, but we're going to try to spread it around a little bit. Grace?
Isn't it like the caste system?
It is absolutely the caste system. That is correct. Now, again, the caste system has been part of Hinduism as long as it's been around, for what we know. We know that there is a racial aspect to the caste system. Lighter skinned people were on top. Darker skinned people were on the bottom. Therefore, that's one of the theories that the caste system was brought into India by Central Asian invaders thousands of years ago. Probably true, but we don't know for sure. We'll probably never know for sure. And the caste system has a metaphor of a god's body. We have the head, the arms, the legs, the feet. And then, of course, at the bottom, we have the untouchables, who are the dirt the god walks on. So these people are forced to do the lowest jobs in Hindu culture. But if I do my job in this life, as bad as it may be, what will happen to me in my next life? If you follow your dharma, you get good what?
Karma.
Karma, yes. And that's a word we use in English, regardless of Hindu tradition. So karma, if you want to think of it, dharma is your test or assignment. Karma is your grade. How did you do? How did I perform? And so if I follow my dharma, in my next life, my soul will move up the caste system, or up the animal kingdom, or up the Minerans, or up, whatever. All right? If I was a roundworm, maybe next life I'll be a flatworm, or what. I can't remember how that's organized in invertebrate philosophy, but physiology. But you probably know better than I do. But anyway, so that's how all that works. Now, the goal eventually is if I'm in a male Brahmin's body, I can then ascend to what's called moksha, M-O-K-S-H-A. Don't need to memorize that. Don't worry about it. It's basically paradise, heaven, whatever you want to call it. And your soul will be freed from the cycle of life and death. So basically, you get to retire. All right? Your soul never dies, but eventually your soul will leave a body and never have to come back to one. That's the ultimate goal. All right? So you behave in a way that your dharma tells you. So that's your job, that's who you marry, that's where you live. All those things historically are determined by the caste system. All right. Now, today, Hinduism is one of the world's great religions. Anybody know which number it is in terms of followers globally? It's in the top 4. Which place you want to guess it is in the top 4? I see a 3. Any other guesses? I see 3. Anybody else feeling adventurous? I see 2. It is 3rd. Correct. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. Those are our, in terms of number of followers globally currently. That's how that works. It is mostly what we call an ethnic religion. It doesn't spread well. You're not going to have a whole lot of missionaries taking it elsewhere. We see a little bit of that, but not too much, because then you're going to have to join the caste system. And as a newbie, where do you think you probably join the caste system at? The bottom, as the great philosopher Drake talks about, starting at the bottom. So we do not want to necessarily do that. So most of us are not going to be super into joining the caste system. So Hinduism is part of Indian culture. It is still part of Indian culture. Technically, when India becomes independent from British colonial rule in 1947, the caste system is outlawed. You can no longer use it to hire, fire, etc. But we know it's still a part of people's lives. You know your caste, your grandparents are the same caste as you. It's part of who you are, even if it doesn't affect your daily life. But it's still something you know and appreciate as part of your family history. Is that everybody okay with that? Understand the broad strokes of Hinduism? Any questions about Hinduism before I move on? Mr. Rich, should I memorize the levels of the caste system? No. No, you should not. Why would you do that to yourself? All right, so no. Remember, the first thing I had you put back in your notebook in August, which seems like it was about 25 years ago, but that would be global macro history. All we're doing, kiddos, and especially now with the changes that we've seen, is big picture for the whole world. Remember that. Okay. As you feel overwhelmed in the next month trying to get ready for this, and you're going to, if you tell me, oh, Mr. Rich, I got this on lock, I'm good to go. You're full of crap. At some point, there's going to be some anxiety. There's going to be some concern. There's going to be, I'm missing something. This is not a standard AP test. This is half of what you did as AP Human last year as freshmen. I got you ready all year long for this big 3-hour test. Well, now it ain't happening. So you just need to do the big picture. You just need to do the big picture. If it takes you more than 5 minutes to study anything, you're studying too hard. Trust me, okay? Big picture. 1 minute, can I tell my mom about it in a minute? If you can, then you're good to go. If it takes you 5 minutes to tell your brother about it, then you know too much. Just like dumb it down for the average person, okay? We're talking big picture stuff, okay? Now, the next religion is Judaism. The major impact of Judaism is it's the world's first monotheistic faith. Also, God in Judaism is not an abstract concept, or God is not a physical being. God is not a person or looks like this, or we can't draw God. God is abstract. And of course, that will influence the 2 most popular religions in the world today, Christianity and Islam. They both have the same concept. And we know that according to the beliefs of those religions, they all worship the same deity, just in different ways. All right. So Judaism, there's one God. It's all based on the belief of a guy called Abraham. Therefore, sometimes we hear Judaism, Christianity, and Islam called the Abrahamic religions. We know that through Abraham's faith and his following of God, when he had told him to sacrifice his son, he is willing to do so. He's almost going to do it, and then he doesn't have to, of which one of us in this chat is named after that individual. So, yeah, there you go, Isaac, you got it. We see the great leaders of Judaism, the 12 tribes of Israel, come from Isaac's lineage. King David, King Solomon, Jesus, etc., all that down the line. So we have the basic belief of the morality comes from the Torah, the 5 fundamental books of Jewish faith, the laws of Moses, hundreds and hundreds of them, our basic belief system. And so Judaism itself is not that popular. There's about 12 million followers today in the world, which in a population of 7.5 billion is not a whole lot, but it does directly influence the creation of Christianity and Islam, and that is its probably greatest significance. And then, of course, we talk about the state of Israel, which actually we won't because it's not going to be in your exam. So, but we did talk about it in school. So, you know, the broad strokes of how that's happened and the controversies there that are still going right now in that part of the world. Okay, that's the broad strokes. So monotheism, an abstract deity, so not a physical being that we can touch. So that's the way we see it in Christianity and Islam as well. Okay, any questions on that one? All righty then, moving on to the next major faith tradition. We are going to go, and make sure I don't skip one. I'm going through my notes as well. We go to Buddhism. And I'm going in chronological order in case you can't tell. So that's what I'm trying to do. Because we know one of our 3 possible essay formats for DBQ is cause or effect. So I think it's always good to remember. And what I just put on Google Classroom, your assignment for the week, the 8x3 chart, when you're putting multiple things in a box, I'm asking you to organize them chronologically. So that's why I'm also giving you 6 days or 5 days to work on that assignment. In all honesty, most of you could probably knock that out in about an hour. So it shouldn't be that terribly difficult, but you know, and you guys can also work on that together. So if you want to, you know, talk to your friend and work on that together, what I don't want you to do is do like, I'll do period 1, you do period 2. No, but if you want to get in the phone or FaceTime or whatever and talk to each other and work through it and study together, perfectly fine with that. No problem there. All right, Buddhism. We know that the Buddha, Siddhartha, was a Hindu, an upper caste Hindu, had a great life, very wealthy, prominence, power, influence, all those good things. He is having what I would call a midlife crisis. He's about 40 years of age. He is starting to get some desire to leave his home. I think all of us can relate to that right now. And he decides to go to the local village and check it out, which he's never been before. He's never had to go get food or buy things because he has servants for that. And he's appalled. He sees poverty. He sees suffering. He sees people whose lives are not very good. And it makes him feel bad. He really does. And so he's a man who's had everything he could ever want. But he's not happy, and he's struggling with that. So he decides to leave his family and take a personal journey of self-discovery. And so he wanders India for several years with nothing, no possessions, barely any rags for clothes. He begs for food when he's starving, but that's about it. And he realizes as well that doesn't provide him with happiness. So he's had the extreme of everything he could want. He's had the extreme of almost nothing. And so he decides one day, sitting under a tree, and he has this moment of enlightenment. And he kind of figures it out. The light bulb, like the cartoon, goes off over his head. And he discovers in his mind what he calls the middle path. Nothing in excess. It's not things that make you happy. It's not the result. It's about process. It's about journey. It's about evolving personally as you go through life. You got to have some fun, but you got to be serious and work at times. You have to find the right balance for you. And as we talked about back in the fall when we introduced this concept in class, that's something as teenagers it's pretty easy for you. Right now you have goals and hopes and dreams, but those will probably change, and some of them won't. Some of you have wanted to be, I want to be a veterinarian when I was 6 years old, and some of you are going to become a vet. If you'd have told 16-year-old me that I'd be a high school teacher, I was going to be a doctor and various forms of medical doctor for a while. And then I decided not to pursue that avenue. And it worked out well for me. I'm doing what I love. But that was something that you could not have told me at 16 that I would have been doing. Not that any of us get stubborn in our own desires and pathways in life, but I'm where I'm supposed to be. And that Buddha would argue that is how you figured out. You don't, if you're sitting there like, I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do with my life today. No, you're not. No, you're not. You'll figure it out. Opportunities will present themselves. Different paths will be in your life that you can travel down. Sometimes that path will be wrong. Sometimes you're going to screw up. Sometimes you're going to have regrets. And then you'll do the best you can to fix it. And that's how life is. And so Buddha basically says there's nothing wrong with enjoying life. But what he says you cannot do is focus on desire. That's his big point, is that we all suffer because we desire. We want something so badly, and then it doesn't happen, and we've wasted all this time wanting something that didn't come to fruition. I think, again, that's something all of us can relate to right now. All right. We should be ramping up for Derby in this city right now. Well, we're not. And so that's something I think all of us can relate to. My poor seniors, who I know, and we've talked about this on some of my Zooms with them about this. Their prom should be in about 10 days. Ain't gonna happen, and that stinks. And it truly, truly does. They're thankful that at least the superintendent has said no matter when we end up being able to, they're gonna have a graduation ceremony, which is cool. So I'm glad we're gonna do that because that's a huge part of a transition in life. But it stinks, and so I think all of us probably during this time have had some thinking about taking things for granted that we always do, and hopefully being a little more thankful for some of the things that we can't do right now. And hopefully whenever life gets back to some semblance of normality, whenever that is, that we don't take things for granted. And you know what? Probably after a couple months of life being back to normal, we probably will take it for granted again. Why? Because that's what humans do. It's who we are. It's what we do. We have short memories. And so Buddha would basically, all of this that we're enduring right now, Buddha would be like, yep, told you. That's how humans are. That's the nature of it. So Buddhism is kind of a weird religion. There's no higher power. Some Buddhists worship Buddha as a god, but he himself said not to do that. There is a concept called nirvana, which is basically equivalent to moksha or a heaven or paradise, that if you do become enlightened, your soul can then move on to that. Now, some Buddhists believe in reincarnation, some don't. One of the famous sayings of the Buddha is there is no future, there is no past, just the present. Well, how can you be reincarnated if that's what you believe? So there's some pretty different beliefs amongst the Buddhist community on how you take those things. But for the most part, Buddhists don't believe in a higher power. It's a journey of self-discovery. It's you. Only you can figure out what your desires are. Only you can figure out how to get around those things and lead a more fulfilling life. So that's how that works. Anyway, so the middle path is how we achieve enlightenment in Buddhism, and only you can figure that out for yourself. Your parents can't, I can't, your loved ones and friends can't do that. Only you can figure that out for yourself. Okay? Does that broadly make sense? All right, we got two more big ones. Actually, let's go now to China. I see two more religions. Let's talk about a couple Chinese philosophies. Of course, we have Confucianism and Taoism. So broadly, let's talk about those ideas. Neither one I would classify as a religion. If people say I'm a Confucianist and that's my religion, who am I to argue with their belief? That's fine. But what neither one does is talk about those big questions. It doesn't ask, why am I here? It doesn't say what happens when I die. It doesn't do those things. And so I would argue that's one of the fundamental things religions tend to do. So therefore, in my mind, they're very important philosophical traditions to this day in Asian culture, but they are not necessarily religions. So Confucianism started by a guy named Confucius. He lives the same time as the Buddha, 6th century BCE. He lives at a time of chaos. The Chinese government is basically dissolved. We have a period called the Warring States era, which pretty much explains it all. Civil war, conflict, fighting, etc. And his philosophy is all about order. It's all about structure. It's all about bringing a sense of calm and order to our lives when things are chaotic. All right. So what he talks about is listening to elders, respecting those who are older than us, who know things we don't know, who have had life experiences we haven't had yet, who can help us out in ways that we don't know. And of course, what every young person your age wants to hear is you should always listen to old people. Ugh, so frustrating, so boring, but it's true. It doesn't mean we're always right. I screw up. Your parents screw up. I know, shocking revelation. Everybody does. But tends to be life experience gives you some things that you can't get otherwise, whatever that may be. And so it's about rules for day-to-day life. It says we should listen to our parents. We should listen to our government. Now, one interesting subplot to that, Confucius says the government's job is to take care of its citizens, to be a good ruler, to be merciful, to be thoughtful, to spend our tax dollars wisely. And Confucius even goes as far as to say, if an emperor is not doing so, that emperor should be overthrown. So it's follow the rules, have structure, ... But if things get bad, that person's got to go. So Confucianism is a part of Chinese life to this day. Well, Mr. Rich, we learned in period 4 that the Chinese government kind of abandons Confucianism for a little bit, It did under Mao, the communist, but I would say today Confucianism has made a big comeback. Big comeback. So there is a statue of Confucius in Tiananmen Square, which is where the protests for democracy were happened in the 1980s. So Confucius is definitely a part of that. And when the Chinese conquer other places in Asia, they spread this. So you'll see Vietnamese people embracing Confucianism, Koreans, etc. So we do see Confucianism extend outside of the borders of China. Now the other one is Taoism. Taoism, if you remember, the symbol is the yin yang. I would try to draw it, but I have no board, and even if I did, I couldn't draw it anyway. But you all know the yin yang. And so the purpose of yin yang is balance and harmony. There is always something good in a bad situation. There's always something not as great in a good situation. And so we should look at nature as our guide. The example I gave you in class is if a rock falls into water, the water keeps flowing and the water keeps flowing, and eventually that water will erode the rock. And so the water doesn't change what it does. It just keeps on flowing and doing its thing. So we have that continuation of life, just keeping doing our thing. Okay. And so therefore we don't panic, we don't freak out, we don't respond too harshly in either a good or a bad way. We just kind of go with the flow is the phrase we often use in Taoism. All right. So I would definitely say it's more spiritual than Confucianism, but it still doesn't say if you're a Taoist, when you die, this happens. It just doesn't. The world's fifth most popular religion, if you look at it broadly, is, indigenous Chinese religion. Indigenous just means native. That would be what we'd call ancestor worship, the belief that our deceased ancestors can provide us guidance from the afterlife, and they can help us out. But that's not really tied specifically to Confucianism or Taoism, and it's certainly a belief older than either of those philosophies. Okay, any questions about that one? Okay, we got two biggies left. Christianity next. Christianity is the world's most popular religion. Christianity is based off many of the tenets of Judaism. In fact, the Savior, the Messiah of Christians, Jesus, was a Jew. So we know that's definitely part of it. We know the Jewish culture teaches that the Messiah, a Savior, will come, but the belief is that that person has not done so yet. Of course, Christians embrace Jesus as that Messiah. We just had Easter weekend. Of course, very important in the Christian calendar, the belief that Jesus was persecuted, was killed, was resurrected after 3 days for the salvation of humankind, and then ascended into heaven. And so, of course, Christian belief is also that Jesus will one day return again. So that is the broad strokes of it. The morality is very similar. The books of the Torah are used in Christian thought. We also have what Christians call the New Testament of the Bible, which consists of the life and times and sayings of Jesus, and then his followers in the early days of the Christian church, the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. We know that Christianity cannot be discussed without describing the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire is the context in which Christianity is created. The Romans were great conquerors, as you know. They were fairly flexible in their tolerance of people's beliefs as they conquered them, because they conquered them for money. So as long as you paid your taxes, we didn't really care what you believed or what language you spoke or those kind of things. And in fact, we didn't want you to be Romans. We wanted to be better than you. And if you're polytheistic, you would just worship a couple Roman gods and you could keep your own gods. It's all good. Of course, both Jews and Christians are persecuted because they are monotheists. And so a monotheist is not going to worship a couple of your gods and mine, and then we just know mine's best. No, if you believe in one, you believe in one. And so that is part of the reason for their persecution under the Roman Empire. Of course, eventually, probably the most significant event after the life of Jesus in the early Christian church is going to be the legalization of that faith by the Romans in the 4th century CE, a guy named Constantine, who is fighting a battle, looks up in the sky as guys are losing, and he sees the Greek letters Rho and Chi, which translates roughly as JC, like Jesus Christ, and he is going to tell his soldiers that they should paint crosses on their helmets. They do, they win, and then he decides that Christianity should become legal. And then on his deathbed, supposedly converts to Christianity himself. And so because Christianity was underground for the first couple hundred years of its existence, its followers persecuted, there developed different strains of it, different belief systems. Constantine has the leaders of Christianity get together at a place called Nicaea, which is why some churches today have what's called the Nicene Creed that they still use. And he basically says that y'all need to figure out what makes a Christian a Christian. So is Jesus the Son of God? Yes. Is there belief in what's called the Trinity? Yes. Which books of the Bible belong? Because there are some other texts that were debated and decided not to be in there. And that debate will still happen 1,000 years later, by the way. And so we eventually come up with broad strokes of what it means to be a Christian. Now, we know, of course, there are many different versions of Christianity, thousands and thousands of them. Most of that will happen later, which I'll mention in another review. But we have the broad strokes of what it means to be a Christian well in place by the first half of the first millennium CE. All right. And there's lots of different versions of that, so we're not going to get into broad strokes. But basically, when you die, you go to heaven, or there is a hell for punishment. The Catholic faith of Christianity believes in what's called purgatory, basically a stopping ground halfway through. But it's monotheistic, and there is a judgment for those how they have acted that determines your afterlife. All right? And so that is what we have there. All right? Does that make sense to everybody? Sure. And then the last big religion, of course, is Islam. Islam is also based on the teachings of Judaism and Christianity. They see themselves as a continuation. If you read the Quran, the holy text of Islam, you will see Isa, which is Jesus in Arabic. You will see Maryam, the Virgin Mary. Her name is actually described and listed more in the Quran than it is in the Bible. And so you don't get the full stories. Basically, if you read the Quran, it's shortened versions, and it expects that you are familiar with Judeo-Christian tradition, that you know who Abraham is, because the Quran doesn't go into great detail who he is. They assume you already know all that stuff because, of course, you're familiar with Judaism and Christianity. And the basic beliefs are there's still one God. However, there's no Messiah in Islam. Muhammad is the last prophet. He is not divine. He didn't come down from heaven. There's no resurrection. None of those things are believed in Islam. Basically, Muslims believe that Christians kind of got confused a little bit. The way I told you this in class was that Muslims look at Christians the way that Christians look at Jews. A lot of similar traditions, a lot of things in common, but they just kind of sort of messed up, believing in not believing in a Messiah if you're Christian, looking at Jewish culture, and as a Muslim believing in the Messiah and some of the other descriptions of the New Testament if from a Christian perspective. So Islam, of course, is the second most populous religion. We know that Muhammad has a vision and is told to basically recite. The word Quran means recite. He goes out and tries to convert people in his hometown of Mecca. He is basically laughed off. People think he's nuts. He's goofy. He's lost his mind. There is a structure in Mecca called the Kaaba, that black building we looked at, that's believed to have been built by Abraham many, many years ago. And it is a center for pilgrimage. People come from the desert communities to that place to worship their different faiths. But in Muhammad's day, it was polytheistic. There were many different belief systems there, and he believed he had been told that he had to get rid of them. He is kicked out of his hometown. He is threatened with death. He goes to another town called Medina. He spends about 8 years there getting followers, building mosques, spreading the faith, and then he will come back with an army and conquer Mecca. And to this day, Muslims pray toward, not to, they don't pray to the object, they pray toward the Kaaba because it represents the triumph of their God over what they believe to be false idols. All right? And that's where we are with that. Of course, Muhammad dies with no succession plan. He does not say who's going to be his major followers. And so we end up with a split in Islam, the Sunni and the Shia. Without getting into too much detail, the Sunni are those that believe that any follower of Islam, because Islam is egalitarian, Islam is believes that all followers are the same, that anyone should be able to lead. And then you have the Shia that believe it should be like traditional monarchy. We should have a line of succession from the original to their children, so on and so forth. We have a civil war. We have conflict. Of course, the Sunni win. Today, about 85% of global Muslims are Sunni. So almost every country in the world that is Islamic, the majority of their followers are going to be Sunni. All right. And so that's where we are in that regard. So looking back across these major faiths, the ethnic religions that don't spread well or purposefully are Hinduism and Judaism. The universalizing religions that try to convert people and do so fairly successfully are going to be Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam. So again, as we kind of close this part of it down, Mr. Rich, do you have to memorize all this? No. I have notes sitting here. I haven't looked at them, granted, because I know this stuff really well. I don't know what they might ask you about religion. Now, do I think religion could very well be a topic on the APDBQ? Well, yeah. It's going to be one of the big ones. Religion, trade routes. Don't worry, we're going to get into the Silk Road real soon. You know, those kind of, one of the revolutions like industrial revolution, yeah, those could political revolution, sure. It's going to be one of those big themes. That was their purpose anyway. The reason they cut down content from last year to this year, they said it was too much and students couldn't learn it all. Of course, I disagree with that, but whatever. With the situation we're in right now, where many schools, the teachers were in the 19th century when this went down. They didn't even finish the 19th century, much less the 20th. Of course, your teacher talks really fast and tries to get everything done. So we got it done for the most part with a couple days here and there. I did notice on YouTube, because, you know, I'm following all my followers, that first lecture I put on China had like 200 views. After that, they were like 40, 63. Some of y'all didn't even look. I put all that effort in teaching you about Japan. Very sad. I'm just kidding. I'm not sad at all. But anyway, so I'm shocked. So the point is that these religions are going to determine a lot about who we are, about how we act, about who we like, who we dislike, who we fight, who we trade with. A lot of these structures of humanity are based on our religious beliefs. Okay? Any questions broadly about the major world religions, either one specifically or broadly? Anyone? Either you're really smart or I'm really good, or both. It's probably both. I assume it's both. Okay, let's go with that. All right, so let's get a little bit. We got about 15 minutes left, 14 minutes left. Let's start a little bit into period one. Okay, the actual details of period one. Let me make sure in my notes there's nothing else in period zero I wanted to say. Nah, whatever. I'm not going to look at it. Whee! All right, there goes that. All right, period one. Yeah, I know y'all missed this. So I'm broadly going through the structure of your study guide. I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point, but I'm going to follow their structure. So 1.1 is China. So let's start with period one China. Now, before I get into it, let me ask you a very important question. What are the dates? Because I asked you to memorize the dates of the time periods, and that's it. What are the dates of period one, beginning and ending?
1200 to 1450.
Cassie, yes, very good, excellent. 1200 to 1450. You still need to know the dates. Now, here is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking because normal DBQs are in a set time period. What I'm thinking is, because of the extraordinary circumstances, and to actually give you a chance to describe your knowledge for periods 1, 2, and 3, I'm thinking this DBQ might be really broad, as in like maybe all 3 time periods broad. So, Mr. Rich, you're saying you think a DBQ could be between 1200 and 1900 CE? That's what I'm thinking. Now, do I have any proof of this? No. But I have one thing that's very important. It's called common sense. It's a skill I do possess somewhat on occasion. And I've also had lots of time to think about it, because what else am I going to do? So that's what I've been thinking about. And so I'm thinking we're going to see a 1200 to 1900 DBQ. Now, Mr. Rich, it was only 1450. You can tell me I'm an idiot later. Trust me, you probably will want to, and I don't blame you. We'll have a special Zoom after the AP test where you can just basically tell me how much I suck. And I'll sit there and let you just tell me bad things. It's fine. It doesn't bother me. Again, like, you're going to hurt my self-esteem. Please, you know that's not going to happen. All right, so anyway, the point is that I think they're going to be really, they want you to pass. They really do. One of the reasons, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself because I said we do this Monday, that I think they went to a 10-point rubric for this DBQ, even though they cut down the time and they cut down the documents, is because I think if you get a 9 or a 10, you're going to get a 5, maybe an 8. I think if you're getting a 7 or an 8, you're going to get a 4. 5 or 6, 3. Now, it could be that a 5 is 8, 9, and 10. A 4 is a 6, 7. We'll see. Again, the average on these suckers normally at a 7 is like a 1.9, a 2.0. So I can't imagine that with the going from 7 to 10, it's going to be bigger than 3-ish, 3.2-ish, somewhere around there. So that would mean they would have to have somewhere around a 3 to a 4 would allow you to pass, because they're looking for a 50% pass rate-ish. That would be my guess. So anyway, why I started talking about that, I don't know. I should probably be more thoughtful in my note take. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to kind of shoot from the hip. That's what I do. So anyway, let's talk about China, which I said I was going to do 3 minutes ago. So China 1.1, 1200 to 1450. Now, when we start this time period in China, China is in what's called the Sung dynasty. I don't need you to know that, but the Sung dynasty had been around since the 10th century, so the 900s. They had become the most powerful civilization on the planet. They had a great architectural, artistic, poetic, cultural flowering. The Shakespeare of China, the Chinese language, if you will, is going to be Tang and Sung dynasty poetry. So it's their classics. It's something you would study in school as a Chinese young person, etc. They have the best ships in the world. They have fast-growing rice they have imported from some of their territories that allows them to feed ever more people. They have the biggest population in the world. They have a huge military. They make a lot of, manufactured goods. Now, not obviously with machines, but by hand. Remember, you can manufacture without being industrialized. They create what you and I would call flying money or credit, which allows people to start businesses and things like that when they don't have all the money themselves. They're doing pretty well when we start 1200 CE. Of course, what's going to change that for a lot of civilizations, not just the Chinese, but early in our time period? Who comes along and ruins everybody's fun? You might have debated on these people way back in September. Somebody say it.
Mongols.
Mongols, Sebastian, you're sealing. Yes. All right. Correct. So the Mongols come in. Now, the Mongols are not conquered, the Chinese are not conquered by Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan dies in 1227. He divides up his empire into 4 parts, and eventually it's going to lead to a lot of chaos. The Mongols don't last very long. But one of his grandsons, Kublai, will successfully conquer the Chinese. Now, the different versions of the Mongols have different philosophies and ideas and all that good stuff. The Mongols that conquer the Chinese, while obviously conquering with violence and force, are relatively tolerant. They're not there to subjugate all Chinese people. They are there to get wealthy, yes, and they're there to promote cultural understanding and ideas. So Kublai Khan was interested in science, philosophy, literature, art, and he made the Chinese, who had historically always believed they were the best, the Middle Kingdom. We don't want outside ideas. We don't need anybody else because, of course, we are China and we are the best. And for most of history at this point, that's true. They have been the best for most of their existence. So that's arrogant, but they could get away with it. Well, the Mongols don't want much to do with the Chinese, ironically enough, but they welcome in outsiders. Marco Polo, the European traveler, is going to come to China during the time of the Mongol rule there. The Silk Road will become a huge flowering trade network, even larger and more wealthy than it had been before. Why? Because A, it's going to extend farther as along the routes of the Mongol Empire, and B, the Mongols provided protection. If you stole from a merchant on the Silk Road, you stole from the Mongols, and that's not a good idea because they would kill you. So the Silk Road brings all sorts of ideas, all sorts of technology, all sorts of religion, languages, etc., etc., etc. As I told you many times this school year, kiddos, when you trade goods and services, you also trade culture. And much of it is unintentional. You don't mean to do it. It just happens. Okay? Christianity comes into China. Islam comes into China. There's still a huge Islamic population in China to this day. All right? And so a lot of these ideas are going to happen. Chinese inventions like paper, like the compass, like gunpowder, which happened during this time we're talking about right now. Paper is earlier, but compass and gunpowder happened on the Sung dynasty. They moved west to India, to the Middle East, and eventually to the Europeans through the Silk Road. And the Mongols facilitate much of that trade. When we think about the Mongols, we often first think about death and destruction. Not unfair. Not an unfair characterization. But the Mongols don't create much, but what they do is bring people together. They're the party host that's talking to their friends, says, oh my gosh, you got to meet this person. They would love this about you. Oh my God, you're a huge music nerd. Oh my gosh, here's my friend that also loves you guys, and they just hit it off. I'm that person. I don't stay in the conversation. I introduce the two people. I stay there for 2 minutes, and then I go talk to somebody else. That's who the Mongols are. Okay, once we've done the conquering, they facilitate, they connect, they bring together. That's their true gift at this time period. Okay, now by 1450, the Mongols have been defeated. We have the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty is started by a peasant. The problem with the Mongols is they have so many offspring that it is hard to determine who will succeed the dad when the dad dies. And so we get a lot of infighting, we get a lot of power hungry, we get a lot of greedy, a lot of those things. And so we have a lot of conflict and they just fall apart. The Mongols are really only at their height about 150 years. And you could argue it's a little shorter than that even. So we have the return of a native Chinese dynasty. And by 1450, they are still one of the great trading centers of the world. Of course, it's called the Silk Road because silk is native to China. We have the silkworm. We have the mulberry plant, which is what silkworms eat. People had been trying to figure out how to grow silkworms for centuries, could never quite do it because they didn't realize silkworms only eat one thing. And so there's all this intrigue with that. Silk is something for the elite. China, of course, also produces spices. They produce tea. They produce porcelain that's so finely crafted. We often to this day call nice dishes, which are made out of porcelain, China. All right. And so that is what they're known for. That is what people want from them. That is where we are. Now, late in time period one, we see a very interesting gentleman, one of my favorites. You all read an article about him and answered some questions. The 6'8" Chinese eunuch Muslim Admiral Zheng He, who is in your study guide. Zheng He is going to sail all around the Indian Ocean, go to Africa, go to the Middle East, go to India, go to the Southeast Asian islands, go all through that area. 7 voyages over 2.5 decades, which is very unusual. It opposes the Middle Kingdom. China doesn't believe it has to go out and do anything. People come to China. Merchants had always been historically treated poorly in China because a merchant, by definition, trades with someone else. Ugh. We like the money, but we don't want your stuff. You're just, ugh. And so Zheng He is going to go out and do all this. And it's also not just about the Chinese learning about others. It's about China flexing. He has hundreds of ships. His biggest ship, you could take all of Columbus's ships and put them on the deck like toys. That's how big these suckers are. And they go out and flex on everybody like, y'all know China's the best. You try to mess with us, you're going to get got. And that's what he says. Now, of course, when he dies and the emperor that supported him dies, those government officials, remember in China, we have this longstanding policy of you take a test, a civil service exam to become a government employee. It's the best and the brightest. And if you pass this exam, you will get a government job. This government job will pay you very well, and you get a lot of prestige and honor for doing it. So many, many people wanted to do this, but only about 3 to 5% of people ever passed the test. And so these mandarins, as they're called, that's why the major dialect of the Chinese language is called Mandarin Chinese. They are concerned about this trend to go outward, about opposing Chinese dominance, about spending all this money to build these huge ships, even though, of course, Zheng He brings in lots of treasure and wealth from his journeys. And so they convince a later emperor that this is all bad. And so we end up destroying Zheng He's ships. We burn them. We burn the shipyards where they were built. We burn the records of his journeys. And Zheng He's basically unknown in China for about 500 years. Until the 20th century. What we know mostly about Zheng He is from where he visited the records those places kept, because it's almost shameful that a man would try to leave China and try to go anywhere else. It's just, we just don't like it. So very much anti-globalization at this time period. So we end time period 1450, China is wealthy. China is a trade center. China is powerful. You may think, well, Mr. Rich, what about the silver trade? That's going to be period 2. That's not yet. Again, the way I describe what you're doing in the next month is this. And I've told you this analogy before, I think, but I'll end today's overview with this. Basically, we've all done laundry. You all, the metaphor is doing your laundry. You know facts. You know, putting your shirt in the washer is learning content. Even with all we've dealt with, I guarantee you that everybody in this chat right now knows enough to pass the AP exam. I know you do. I don't have a single doubt in my mind. Now, you need to do some studying, yes, but that's what you're doing right now. What you have to do is then take the laundry from the basket, take the knowledge in your brain and organize it. When was it? Where was it? because ordinarily the College Board does things by time period. Now, again, I'm speculating that you're going to have a 700-year DBQ. I know this is shocking to hear me say this. I could be completely wrong. I could be so wrong because I don't know. I'm just guessing. So you still need to study as you go through this next month by time period. Not just where was it, when was it? So that's the metaphor of taking your shirts and your underwear and your socks and your pants and whatever else out of your laundry basket and putting it in the right drawer. And so that's what we're doing. You know what you're doing. I promise you do. I know you do. We just got to organize it so that it makes sense for this exam. Okay? All right. So we're going to stop for today.